All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting edition of Two Men in Black and White, an honest conversation. Brock Ellis joins us now from right outside New York City, who was in New York City for yesterday's National Day of Protest. I'm Mark Hayes, right outside the Dirty ATL, shouting. So, Brock, let's get right to it. Man, describe the feeling when you saw all those people in this massive protest. I know you got there a little early, but man, did it build up to an impressive sight.
Yeah, I'm a rookie protester. We've discussed that was my first one ever. So, like a rookie, I showed up early, right? It's rainy and cold. I'm there in Bryant Park, and I'm wondering, wow, this is all that's going to be here. Like, this is going to be a bust. I'm like, okay, I'll march down Fifth Avenue with them, but woo, I expected at least more than this. Not that cold out. And then about a half hour later, you just saw the big numbers trooping through Bryant Park. And then when I got with the group, turned the corner to 41st Street, making our way to Fifth Avenue, the streets were absolutely jammed to the gills. We were barely moving. It took like an hour to go like half a block to get to Fifth Avenue. And I was asking other people, I'm like, this is my first protest. Like, is this big? Like, I'm like, this feels really big. Like, is
Right.
this big? And they're like, yeah, there's a lot of people out here. So people were acknowledging like, wow, this is big. But even the group I was around didn't realize till we got to Fifth Avenue how big it was. And I had to go to a higher vantage point to see. And then it was just like, yeah, this is just massive numbers. And it was just endless. The people marching down the street. So it felt great in that moment. Like, wow, people came out for this.
Right. So, Brock, you started texting me early, right? Like 12, 12:15, 12:30, 1 o'clock. And I'm going through like the local news feeds, DC, New York, Atlanta, where I am. And I'm checking, the bigger market television stations to see, if we've got anything up. MSNBC, CNN, nothing on their social feeds about these protests. And everyone knew this was happening because we had protests in Topeka, we had protests in Hawaii, protests in Vegas, right? Like these little towns in Florida. It was everywhere except corporate media.
I didn't see a single media person. I didn't see a single interview going on. There were like people taking photos, but they looked all like independent journalists. Didn't No one looked accredited, necessarily accredited. Maybe they were, but like not a single person interviewed. No one with a microphone was there the entire day that I was there. Maybe I didn't end at 24th Street, so no one person probably saw the entire scope of the march in New York City yesterday. Zero media. So I was doing the same. I was scrolling Blue Sky and seeing what was going on from other participants around the country. But yeah, major media didn't want to talk about it, and I heard Fox News didn't even mention it all day. I didn't catch that till the end of the day.
Yeah, not a mention. And it's really sad because that that validates the pure abdication of their duty, right? They've just said, fuck it, we're not covering the anti-Trump movement. And that's what I think the beauty of it is. Chicago, New York, DC, these overhead views that we saw yesterday were massive, massive. So tell me what it was like to be in your first
Yeah,
protest.
let me throw out a bunch of observations, and then you can just jump on whichever one you find interesting and the like. Number one, the Manhattan March, which I'm told ended up being 100,000 plus, was incredibly white, right?
Okay,
It was not a diverse crowd. I mean, it's Manhattan. It was the only one that I knew of that was in New York City. Very white crowd.
right.
National, a lot of Asians, a lot of, like I said, different languages being spoken and the like, but very few black people, very few Latinos. Maybe a good thing. We've been talking about the black people, maybe like, hey, white people, you show your ass out there first.
Right.
Second, the demographic, to me, it skewed very old. It
Wow.
was it was an older group, and maybe that's why it wasn't necessarily a raucous group because of the age dynamic. And I don't want to say there weren't any young people there, but it's a very old group. Social security was all over the place. We'll get to that in a second.
Makes
So
sense.
it skewed old and white, probably skewed a little female versus male on that front. from my estimation, first time. And I want to say this is a criticism. Like there was no, it seemed disorganized.
Right.
It felt really grassroots. There was no quote leadership there. Like no politician showed up. They probably would have gotten overwhelmed anyway.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I saw Booker showed up in somewhere in Jersey, and Mallory McMorrow showed up at one of them in Michigan, and Jamie Raskin showed up at one. But you didn't need the leaders there. The marches did not need any leaders, need any leadership. But because of that, it was sort of chaotic, and no one knew when does it start? Where are we going? And then you just start following crowds and milling around. There
Right.
was there was no unified message. We keep talking about like, well, we need a unified message to get everyone together.
Right.
Maybe because blacks and Latinos didn't show in New York. Maybe it's a good thing. We can get to that. We'll see what your thoughts are on that. But also, the signage was really incredible. Like people spent their Friday doing making
Making
signs.
time.
Like there's an incredible amount of signs out there. But the signs touched on every single topic you could possibly imagine, from saving NPR to watchdogs to checks and balances, a lot of Social Security, women's issues, keep your hands off my privates, a lot of like anti-Doji, anti-Musk stuff, Palestinian flags, pro-Israel stuff, like you name it. People were out there in force for it, except almost no climate change. I
Oh.
didn't I didn't see a single thing like referencing the racism or DEI.
Oh.
Didn't see a single like DEI poster, but everything else under the sun was represented, which I thought was interesting because it's kind of like it's everything. Like it's just accumulated and piled up on people. And of course, there was a bunch of stuff about how people lost so much money in the last 48 hours in the tariffs.
Right.
But even
Right.
the chance to me, first of all, I think hands off is a weak buzzword.
Right.
It worked,
Right.
it got
Right.
people out, but like it's not like it's weird. It's almost like a defensive buzzword. So I'd like to
Right.
scrap that hands off. There was some Trump must go chants, and this is what democracy looks like, but there wasn't like a kind of a chant that it fired up the crowd. It was
Right.
just huge. It was just huge numbers. It was just a huge
Yeah.
representation of people that are fed up. So it was more like I heard the term fed up than I heard the term angry in New
Right.
York. And New Yorkers go to anger pretty quickly, but
Oh,
I
no
feel
doubt.
like also that the nature of the dynamic of the people were there. So overall impressive. I'll be at the next one. I think they already put one on the docket for April 19th. I think there was
Okay.
a sense that there needs to be multiple of these and they need to build momentum. And that was this wasn't the first one. This was like a second one, right? The
Right.
50-51 group did a lot of smaller ones maybe a month ago. This is the
Right.
first one where Indivisible really got behind it.
Right.
And I think everyone's sense was this will not be the last time we're out there. There was almost like, well, we'll see you again, knowing that this didn't necessarily accomplish a goal. You
Yeah.
might not even have noticed, which is why I think
Mm.
DC has got to be the next one. Like we need to overwhelm DC. Anyway,
Right.
that's a lot of words, a lot of thoughts. I don't know which of them, like, you were scouring what was going on everywhere. How does what do I say connect to what you were hearing
It
elsewhere?
absolutely does. It absolutely does. First, let's talk about the skewing a little bit old. No surprise there with Social Security, right? This is the lifeblood of our older Americans, right? Even if they have pensions, they rely on that extra check from Social Security. And I've always wondered how Republicans got away with characterizing it as an entitlement. You ain't entitled. It's your money. You've been feeding into the system all your life. So that makes no sense to me how they've gotten away with that. They've been doing that since the 80s, since they've been talking about killing, Social Security. And the other thing is, you talked about not seeing any signs for racism. Well, it's interesting because, Black People Stay Home was trending on social media yesterday. And the interesting thing was, and what struck me when you were kind of going through your review there, is when the posters came out, right, for the hands off rally, and it had all the different topics on it, right? Social Security, Doji firings, hands off my private parts. All these different areas, like you said, people are fed up with. no racism, no DEI, no voting rights, right? No end mass incarceration. All the things that impact black and brown people were not mentioned in the literature for the gathering. So you saw black people saying, "Hey, stay home," and for good reason. Many of these videos that I saw posted yesterday during the march and before the march, black people were saying, "Hey, who's going to be the first ones to get shot at when we go out there?" Right? And thank heavens, all of these protests were peaceful. New York City, by the way, Brock, had 44 police officers on duty because they never expected for anything this large to take place. So they were caught flat-footed, in terms of a police presence.
Incredibly low police presence for that big a crowd. It was noticeable they were barely out there, but you got the sense they really weren't needed.
Right,
That crowd, the dynamic of that crowd was not, no one was throwing a rock through a window anywhere, right?
right,
It was,
right,
it was a, because it was skewed old and there weren't enough young people there, which was also another missing piece of the puzzle, is it didn't get rowdy. In my mind, it wasn't intimidating enough. It was a great day.
right,
Need to build off it, and I think it needs to get more aggressive, and the messaging needs to get more aggressive. Trump must go. Like, I want fuck Donald Trump, right?
right,
I want
right,
some hardcore punch him in the nose. I want shit that he's going to hear. Because my
right,
sense, he just played golf yesterday, and Fox News didn't show it. That his aides probably didn't even tell him it was going on. Like, he probably has no fucking idea that there was these marches throughout the country. He's so in a
right,
bubble and in his own world. But
right.
it's interesting.
No one really got to that yesterday because they were so focused on the dynamicism of the marches and just how outlandishly huge they became. And so, no one really focused on, Trump, and Elon was calling for arrests, and, your typical right wingers had the George Soros thing going, and they should be held accountable for the violence. Well, there was no violence, moron. Like, what are you looking at?
And if we were supposed to get paid, I'm still waiting for my check, and I don't know
Well,
what
let me know.
to get on for that, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, let me know when the check comes. You know,
No, it was grassroots. There's no food, no water, no bathrooms. I mean, we were just out there.
right? But Brock, this is why what you and I are doing is so important, right? You and I are trying to figure out how we can work together to put an end to this madness, right? And it involves white supremacy. It involves ending racism. It involves fairness, equity, right? All of us being a part of the American dream. And I don't believe for one second that those protesters out there are the same people who are saying, you know, I don't want black people to be able to own a home. I don't want black people to be able to ascend the corporate ladder. I don't want black people to be able to educate their kids, to the best of their ability. Those are not the people that are out there. But because we live in our bubbles, right, and we're not coming out, that's why what you and I are doing needs to resonate.
So the majority of the people agree with what you just said. The majority of white people, but we have to say it more, and we can't have days like yesterday that don't say it. Like, it's got to be a part of the message. I get it. You don't want your Social Security taken from you. I get
Right,
it. I
right,
get that that's your sign. But you also, you need to be espousing and you need to be championing like a more equal America throughout the races. You can't just be mad that ICE is throwing Latinos because there's a bunch of ICE, you know, placards as well. Get ICE out of here type of thing. But you can't just not want Latinos thrown in the back of vans and sent to like dark holes in New Mexico or Gitmo. You have to want them to have an equal opportunity in this country, and you have to champion it. It's not just enough to say I don't want them carted off and sent to El Salvador. That's lowest common denominator. The messaging has to be bigger than that. It was missed, and that's where the leadership has to step in, because the leadership can craft the message for the masses. And the masses were there yesterday kind of waiting for the message. It was a little bit messageless. It was
Right.
1,000 different messages. It wasn't a unified message, and it missed the mark. And that's where I get frustrated with the true Democratic leadership is they won't talk that they're pro-immigration. They won't talk that they're truly pro-equality for
Right.
blacks and Latinos. They won't, fight hard enough for LGBTQ. They still kind of view these as like third rail issues they want to stay away from and hope they just come along with the rest of the package. And I'm like, no, they need to be talked about and they need to be up front. They need to be embedded in the conversation. That's where these marches miss the mark. But maybe you have to miss the mark to learn something. But somebody has to message it.
Right.
And that's where some leadership has to harness these masses now.
And Brock, and what surprises me, especially when it comes to the Latino population, is how integral they are in our economy. Right? This is the labor force that we're talking about now. This is why prices are what they are. When they go away, right, who's going to take those jobs? Right? Because they typically pay less, they typically don't come with benefits, right? And they're typically the jobs nobody wants, right? But the Latino population thrives off those jobs, right? And next thing you know, you're living out here in the suburbs with me, you see nothing but Latino landscape companies, nothing but Latino roofing companies.
It's entry level, but it's a stepping stone. In that way, it's what every immigrant population has always done in American history, except for the blacks who were carted over here as slaves, right?
Right.
Everybody else kind of came up here, started at the bottom, generally moved into the cities, and kind of figured it out, started doing the shittiest work that no one else wanted to do, and worked their way up. Yeah, the presence, it's missing. It was missing. But yesterday was still a good day, right? It wasn't a perfect day, but yeah, it was a really good day. It was encouraging to see that many people out there.
Yeah. And for me, as an African American man, it was very encouraging. It was very, even though the message didn't directly relate to me and my issues, right? It was good to see, okay, America's fed up with this shit. They may not be saying or chanting the issues that directly relate to my plight and those that directly affect my family, but at least we're moving in that direction. Because at some point, when the leadership starts crafting these messages, right? And Jamie Raskin had a great message down in Washington. Swalwell showed up. Swalwell actually said, quote unquote, this is what kicking the shit out of fascism looks like, and got a rousing applause for it. So when they start getting together, you throw Jasmine and AOC and Cory Booker, who was in Montclair, New Jersey yesterday, with a great message, a message of unification. See, that's one thing Cory's always brought about, is he can speak to black and brown issues in a unifying way, right? That's not intimidating, that doesn't say, oh, black power, but all of us together. And I think that's the beauty of Cory Booker. So when we continue to move in that direction, and you have influencers like Jasmine, AOC, Cory, and the like, even the squad, right? We start to get that unified message with the Swalwells, the Raskins, the Murphys, and all the people who are and the Bernie. Don't forget the Bernie bros and Bernie.
Yeah, Bernie was on CBS News this morning, which is more like it's not a politics show, but they featured Bernie because he's getting the huge crowds and he got him a chance to give his message to a more mainstream audience. And Bernie even touched on race today. Sometimes I think he's race blind, but the point is, why are more white politicians / leaders better at talking about the inclusive message?
Right.
Why does that have to come from the black and brown side of the equation? Mark, you there?
Go.
Yeah, you lost me a second. It's raining, so the internet's not working. Technology. So we need it more from the white side of the ledger in terms of talking inclusivity better. I always say we need straight politicians to talk on behalf of LGBTQ. Why does it just have to be the LGBTQ politician that talks about. That gets us back to that selfishness where you only talk about the things that are about you, when in reality, these have to be bigger than just you
Right.
individually. You have to like recognize the us in it.
Yeah.
It's still a missing piece of the American psyche. And like,
Yeah.
hopefully, I'm looking for things to change through this carnage of Trump. And, I'm not seeing all of what I want to see, but, saw some good pieces of it.
It's interesting too because the other message that you heard along with Black folks, um, you know, promoting the sit this one out message, you heard them saying, "Hey, we put 92% up for Kamala and 80 to 85% for Black men, 92% for Black women at the election. That's when we needed you.
Yeah, where were you?
White women, we needed you during the election. So now, don't expect us to come out here and fix what you voted for."
You know what liberal white women, like white women on the left, were saying? Because I, asked a lot of questions yesterday. They were saying, we were out here 8 years ago. You remember that women's march the day after? Was it the day after Trump got elected?
Ooh,
And
yeah,
I found myself apologizing. I'm like, you know what? I wasn't
you're
there.
right.
I was not there. So they're looking at me like, where were you? And I'm like, you know what? I said, I'll never miss another one. But they're like, where were you? Like, we were on this the day after he got elected the first time. Hey, white man,
Right,
where the fuck were you? So it's
right,
funny, it's trickled down, right? Everyone's like,
right.
the next group and the next group. But white men are the worst culprits. We're by the numbers. We're the biggest supporters
She
of
had a
MAGA
great
and
point.
Trumpism and the whole white supremacy movement. So I
She
get
had
it.
a great point. She had a great point. Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one to come back from. All you can do is apologize at that point.
Absolutely. I
So,
was
but Brock, that is the beauty of this, right? Because we were talking to each other. That's the beauty of these marches. You get to see that. Like I told you, when I uh, went to like my very first marches during George Floyd. That was the first time I was ever able to participate in a march when I wasn't part of the media. And that's what I was learning is that we are more alike and we are more aligned, than we are different. We just live in those different silos that you and I have been talking about for the last 2 months.
Here's another thing I heard yesterday when I was asking people, what about today got you out here? What do you, I even told them, like, hey, I'm doing a podcast with a high school friend of mine, and we're like, he's black, I'm white, and we're trying to look at all these issues from the different perspectives and the lives we've lived and how America treats us and trying to, like, dig into some of these issues. And I was like, asking them, I said, I use this term like the complacent white American, like, but wow, we have big numbers out here today. Why do you think it took to today? And more than one person said to me is like, I was ready to go the day after the election. No one, like, basically saying we were just waiting for someone to put the date on the calendar. Like, they've just
Wow.
been waiting for the trigger, waiting for the call to action. And that's where the leadership on the left really fell down, right?
Yep.
Because none of it happened between the election and inauguration when maybe you could have, like, shown a strength of force against some of these actions.
Right.
Maybe not, but maybe you could have scared Trump a little bit not to do all this shit, and maybe he would have adjusted. But even as soon as it happened, like, why is it taking us 80 to whatever 90 days, not even maybe it's 80 days or so into
Right.
this for this big a call to action? But some people were saying like they were just waiting for the. It really took Indivisible to put this on the calendar. Like people
Right.
literally, they've just been waiting. That they're not complacent.
All right. All right. Well, that's
No,
good to
no
know.
one
That
made
is great to know.
no one made the call.
Right. That is great to know. So, my thoughts on the next one are that we hit the Mar-Lago. We hit Mar-Lago. Shut down the opportunity to play golf while our economy is crating.
Okay, I want the next one to be everybody in DC,
And
and I
DC,
want DC overwhelmed. There's an argument to be made that it shouldn't be a weekend, that should be a work day, and
right,
basically shut down the US economy.
right,
I would argue I want the next one, everyone goes to DC
I like
and
that.
they shut down DC. Like they can't move. No one can get from there, can get even into the White House. Can't unless you live there. And then you
Right.
can't get out. Like I want an intimidating, overwhelming force of bodies just swarming around the White House. I want it to be more intimidating than
Right.
yesterday was. And I want it in Trump's face. Now, I know he runs away and he's never there on the weekends, but if he can't get back, and I don't want anyone to, I don't want people to leave until there's change. I don't know
Right.
if April 19th is going to be the one for that, but one of these is going to have to be where nobody leaves and we force Trump to call on the troops because people were talking about that yesterday too. Like, where does this lead to? Does this get violent? The old people remember Kent State. Like, they're like, is it going to get violent? I'm like, yeah, but like if he calls the military and they don't show up, he's done. He's no longer commander in chief. And if they do show up and start firing, wow, that'll wake up America, right? Like, so people are already thinking down the road that there's going to be something that gets ugly. And it's
Right.
just a matter of which one when. And I'm from the camp sooner rather than later because every day America is in decline and we're going to have to dig ourselves out of this hole with the rest of the world. So the less damage we do, the better. So the faster we get a move on this. So that's my take. My take's DC, yours is Mar-a-Lago. Maybe we got to be in both places because not everyone can fit in DC.
Right. Right. But at least we inconvenience him. I'm thinking if it's DC and we inconvenience him, that's fine. If we have to send a group to Mar-a-Lago, let's hit it. I mean, I'm 12 hours either way, right?
Yeah, yesterday was let's view yesterday was about us.
Right.
And the next one, now that we know we have a force, now that we
Right.
know we have the army, we've
Right.
proven to ourselves. Now let's turn the gaze and say, okay, what's the strategy for
Going
gaining
forward.
for getting change? Like the ultimate end goal is we want Trump out of office. So how do we get him out of office? What's the strategy for that?
Right.
My play is aggressive protest in DC, force his hand, have him call in the troops, have the troops either say no or have the troops fire, and it gets
Away.
ugly. And now all of America's like, wait a second, this is fascism. And then maybe the Republican Congress gets scared of the people instead of Trump, and they move to impeachment, and we get some sort of coalition government for the next 3 years until we get a next election.
Right.
So that's my view of how we can actually get out from under Trump.
Right.
I don't know. Is that realistic? Can that happen? I think it can happen. It
I
happens
think
in
it
other
can.
countries. I mean, fucking
Hey.
South Korea deposed their, got rid of their guy when he
Right.
called it martial law.
And we've helped plenty of other countries, manufacture a situation like that too. So we know
Ukraine did
how
it.
it's done.
Ukraine did it, right? That's a great documentary. Watch the Ukraine documentary. They just stayed on the streets until that Russian-backed corrupt leader hightailed it out of the country. And then they
Yeah.
went back to being a democracy. And,
Yeah.
Putin's been pissed ever since, right?
No doubt.
So it can be done. We can do it here. I think the will is there.
Right.
It can't be the older crowd, right? That's where we got to get the young people, and
And
like
young people.
or black people really know how to march. White people didn't really know how to march yesterday. It was like a sort of a dance party, right? A bunch of white people there. But what?
No megaphones. You got to have a megaphone at a march.
Very few. One or two megaphones. And and the worst rallying cries. But I get it. This is what democracy looks like. But it was like playing the DJ playing the same song over and over because no one had anything else clever to say.
You got to get some black folk out there with some megaphones and some signs and some music. And, and we need a couple of reverends out there. You can't have a good march without a good reverend and a good pastor. But maybe young people saw what was happening yesterday and said, okay, my parents are pissed, my grandparents are marching, I better get out here and march for my future as well, right? Because my future is much, much longer and much brighter than theirs, right? They're in their sunset years, my parents are getting older, I better get out here and help if I want a better country for me and my kids.
Well, between now and April 19th, if that is in fact the next one, I'm pretty sure it's what I saw. Um, I think like there needs to be a focused messaging over the next 5 weeks to get young people out there.
Right.
Maybe it's a little bit, I know in the Jewish community you can always do the Jewish shame and make people feel guilty and bad and guilt them out on the street. But hopefully, maybe something more inspiring and maybe a call to action to young America, beyond just leaving it up to them to see it. Let's get on
Right.
social media. Let's show them the footage. Let's remind them why it's so important for them to be there. Because I think there would have been more climate change focus if younger people were out there. Like I told you, that was a missing piece of the puzzle on the signs.
Right.
They're going to live in this world a hell of a lot longer than us. Maybe
Right.
more things about education. They're the ones who are going to get screwed. Maybe things about the fact that we're cutting back on science and we decided we're not going to cure diseases anymore. Well, they're the ones that are going to like live shorter lives because we don't have cancer research and all these, other, elements. And also, they're more pro-choice,
Right.
right? So bodily
Right.
autonomy, like, is still
And
a big issue. So I want that. I want to
issues
see that
impacting it.
messaging as well as obviously some more messaging that inspires the black and brown community to get out there.
Absolutely. Well, I think we just keep pushing, keep having these conversations. I think we focus on getting the message out there that it needs to be across the board. 8 to 80 needs to be the rally cry, right? Everybody who's able and capable needs to be out on the streets letting Donald Trump and Elon Musk know you're not welcome. You're not welcome. Your kind is not welcome.
Yeah, and I want to let's move to some messaging too about like what the strategy of this is.
Right.
Maybe this, as much as to punch Trump in the nose and embarrass him, anger him, embarrass him, get him to act irrationally and show like the still complacent white Americans that he's a lunatic and
Right.
can't be in this country for 4 years because he'll run us into the ground.
No doubt.
That messaging out there, as well as a strategy of what do we want to happen. A messaging to the Republican Senate and the Republican Congress, like stop being afraid of Donald Trump,
Right.
impeach him,
Right.
impeach him.
Now.
You know he should be impeached. Stop
Right.
being afraid of Donald Trump. You should be afraid of us, not
Us.
Donald Trump, and start pressuring the John Thunes and the Johnsons and the Grahams, and start telling them like, look, we know,
Right.
take strength in our numbers and do what's right for America,
Yeah.
and maybe we can start peeling off. How are the Republicans in such lockstep? How is
Um,
MAGA still lining up behind this fucking psychopathic, malignant, narcissist moron? Like, how have more of them not peeled off? We've seen little small signs, Mitch McConnell going against the tariffs, but like, we need to really, really almost give those people the courage, the fear or the courage.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Right. So that's cool. That's cool. Well, great job on the spot yesterday, my friend. You were Brock on the scene. Loving it. Loving it. You got your first medal there. Getting into the action.
got that one little stripe now, like a corporal or something in the protest army. Be out there again. Once you do it once, you get the feel for it. Like, and that was almost the message of everyone. Like, this will not be the last one. Once you've done it, and success breeds success, right? And it was such a successful day. How does it not build on it? And like I said, it was lousy weather. You didn't see many protests in the Midwest, right? Because they had tornadoes and rainstorms. So hopefully they come around on the 19th. But the weather was lousy, and 100,000 plus came out in New York. The weather was lousy in Boston. You get a nice day. You get a nice day in April in DC. Let's get 1 million out there. Can we get a million plus in DC and or Mar-a-Lago? Maybe Mar-a-Lago's smaller. Maybe you only need 100,000 down there. But you get 1 million plus in DC. Ooh, that'll be intimidating. Get some speakers out there, like with some serious rallying cry type of messages.
And you get 1 million people in DC. You already can't move in DC when just the DC residents are there and the DMV residents. The traffic is already horrible there.
Every street will be shut down. Every street will be shut down.
Shut it down. And maybe that's what we should do. Like, when the truck drivers converged on DC, you know, maybe we should just say, hey, everybody drive to DC. Let's gridlock the fuck out of it, and let's really let them know we're not moving anywhere. You can't tow everybody's car.
Those doji fuckers not get a little bit intimidated when
Right,
hundreds of thousands of people around their building screaming at them?
right.
Like,
That's
Doji
what we need.
sucks, right? Like, these little 25-year-old kids stealing people's social security. Like, if they see waves of faces, bodies as far as the eye can see, like, do they really want that job? Do they really feel good about what they're doing? They really feel
Oh,
like they're doing what's right for America when they're looking out that window
exactly.
of Doji headquarters and they all
Exactly.
they see is waves of bodies screaming at them? I think, those are the things that
Oh,
make a difference.
yeah, man. All right, bro. Well, good stuff, man. Let's get this out on the air. Let's get talking to folks, and let's keep having this conversation because it really matters. What you and I are doing is important, and more and more people need to see it. So let's bang it out. Let's share it with our friends and family, and let's get it to everybody we can possibly get it to under the sun.
Good stuff, Mark. Enjoy the rest of your day. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right, sounds good.
Okay.
Peace.
Bye.